Hello, Move Nation, and welcome to another episode of United We Move podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Beckner, and today I have the one and only Reverend Kim Jackson. Kim has been a member of Move since 2011. She has a wealth of experience in so many areas, and we discuss how her time in the gym has benefits that carry over to parts of her life that surprised her, such as her activism and her duties as a priest. We also talk about the importance of taking care of yourself first before taking care of others, her thoughts on communication and gaining perspective through listening, the benefits of being involved in many different communities, including Move Nation, inequality in health and wellness, showing yourself grace, and the importance of just showing up. We packed a lot into this 40-minute podcast. There's so much information here. I learned a lot about Kim. I learned a lot about her philosophies. And this was an important conversation for me to have right now. I really appreciate Kim's thoughtful guidance as we are navigating these social injustices and inequalities that are coming to light through the Black Lives Matter movement and under the backdrop of COVID. Again, this was just a great conversation for me, so please listen and please enjoy. First off, thanks for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're busy. You got a lot going on between everything you do, so thank you for coming on. So you are a priest, you are an activist, you are running for Georgia State Senate. You are a weightlifter, you are a CrossFitter, you are a member of the 0830 class at Move. You are a wife, you're a farmer. I list all of these things, and they're certainly aspects of your life, but they don't really define who you are. I have this philosophy, and it's nothing really unique to myself. I didn't come up with it on my own, but I have this philosophy that we live as many lives as there are people who know us. So we are who we represent to other people, but we are also the person that nobody can know, the person we are to ourselves. So in my eyes, from my perspective, you are a kind and knowledgeable and thoughtful and strong and bold and impassioned person.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how you see yourself and how your perspective influences the way you choose to live your life.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it depends on the day, right? I think that's probably true for most of us. I will say that one of the reasons why I CrossFit is because I am strong, and it reminds me that I'm not just physically strong, that for some reason the translation between pushing a lot of weight helps me push myself mentally and spiritually and emotionally, because every day I don't feel nearly as strong emotionally. I certainly recognize myself as a gifted person who has many talents and many graces, but there are definitely days when I wake up and think, wow, this is really hard, and I don't know if I can do this. And so, I see myself different ways every time, and I'm always honored though when other people see beautiful gifts inside of me.
As far as those strengths, what is strength to you, and how do mental and physical strength complement each other?
Yeah, so I think strength is persisting with the hard things. So being an adult in life is difficult. Quite frankly, I think being a teenager was hard, and even probably as a kid, there were some hard times, but adulting is hard. And so persevering through that, I think, is a sign of strength. I think that when we're able to stay true to who we are and the values and the principles that we hold, that's a sign of strength, because there are a lot of opportunities to not hold on to those values or to kind of waver. So I see those things as strength in terms of my own integrity, in terms of my mental and spiritual well-being. And, like I said, there is something about I used to say, so when we were in the gym and when I was able to go in the gym and, if we would do back squats and say I'd like back squat, I don't know, 250 pounds or something
Uh-huh.
like that, I would say, well, hell, if I can lift 250 pounds, then, the weight of the world that I'm walking out into just doesn't seem quite as significant. I
Right.
think I can handle it. Okay. So there is something about able to push one's body that does help me, therefore, push myself spiritually and emotionally and mentally.
Mhm. What about your weaknesses? So as a CrossFit community, as a gym, and our particular gym, we strive to be a safe space for people to work on their weaknesses or to practice vulnerability. So how do you specifically target and improve on your weaknesses, whether in the gym or not?
Yeah, so I hate running. I think anybody who's been to the gym with me knows this. And so some days I absolutely avoid it, and other days I'm grateful to challenge myself. And I think it's true with life. So there are a lot of things that I do that I think require bold leadership. And there are days that I do those things and I challenge myself to be a voice, to go out and be with protesters, or um, to stand with someone who is experiencing homelessness and walk them through a whole intake process. Like there are things that I do that are hard. And then some days, honestly, I don't push myself, right? Like maybe it's called a recovery day for CrossFit. But other days, it's also just like, I'm not going to run today. I'm going to just row. And
Hmm.
that's okay too. I think that something that CrossFit has taught me so much that I try to apply to being a pastor is um, the importance of just showing up. Like, I can't tell you how many times I have walked into the gym at CrossFit and I feel like I've already won just because I showed up. And even if my numbers are at the very bottom of the board, if I don't move very fast, or it might be one of those workouts that's clearly not made for, that's going to clearly stretch my shortcomings or my things that need improvement.
Hmm.
The fact that I showed up matters. And I've really applied that to my life as a priest. Like sometimes I just show up. I don't have the right words to say. I don't know. I don't know the right prayers to pray or whatever, but I show up, and that's good too. And so I think CrossFit has really helped me realize that in my own life and ministry.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for learning from experience, and even within that experience and kind of learning as you go along. Something that I've been picking up, particularly in business, as I've been working with a mentor and going through that process, but also something that I've seen in other aspects as well, is that the people that you idolize or the people who you see as like the top or the leaders in whatever industry or whatever field, they often don't know what they're doing either.
Yes.
you know so everybody's just kind of making it up as they go along,
Yeah.
and we're always just looking to the leader to decide what that path is. As far as obstacles and setbacks go, how do you recover from injuries, and how do you check your ego at the door?
Recovering from injuries, I found, so I actually had a quite significant injury at the gym,
Hmm.
and I found that actually the biggest part that I had the hardest part to work on in terms of recovery was my own mental game. It was the whole getting my head back right so that I wasn't afraid anymore. So months after my back was 100% healed, I still in my head was really afraid and didn't want to didn't want to do the same movement again just in case it might cause me harm. And so I've really had to work on talking to myself about here are the facts. And so I can do this with an injury, right? So with my back, I could say, here are the facts. I've gone to physical therapy. The physical therapist has signed off on this. I've done all these exercises, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Therefore, you can do this. And the same is true in my life. So, as a clergy person, I walk into hospital rooms with people who are in their last stages of life and they are
Right.
dying. And it's hard and it's scary and even if they're not my loved one, there's still hurt that comes with that. And so, every time I know that that's a possibility, I kind of have to talk myself through the facts. Like, here are the facts. Kim, you've done this before. You know how to do this. You've gone to school to learn how to do these things. And then that kind of helps me walk into the room. And so I think that's how I kind of deal with injury. I think with ego, some days I check it well and other days I don't. CrossFit is the ultimate in ego check for me, though, because, I could go to a gym where all I had to do was lift weights, which I am excellent at lifting weights, right? But CrossFit checks my ego every time there's a workout that requires me to have any amount of stamina, right?
Right.
And so I appreciate that about CrossFit and the ways that it pushes me to remind me that none of us are great at everything. Like, that's just not humanly possible. We all have weaknesses. We all have things that we have to work on.
Yeah. A little bit of what you just talked about, going to the hospital and kind of preparing yourself to be strong for someone else.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of this idea of putting your oxygen mask on first, before you can help someone else. And I think that's, rather than selfishness, I think that's more about preparedness. So how do you support your own health, or how do you support yourself while also supporting the health of those who you've chosen to as your community?
Yeah. So, CrossFit has been a big part of that. I don't know if you know this story, but when I came to CrossFit many years ago now, it was because I was depressed. Like, I had been working, people don't talk about this a lot, but being a pastor has its own kind of toll on one's emotional health, because you are often having to be with people who are in the worst times of their lives. And so I was really depressed when I found CrossFit. And there was something about waking up and coming in at 8:30 every morning and having those endorphins flow that helped me kind of dig my way out of that depression. And so I really have seen working out as an important, critical piece of how I care for myself. And I also live on a farm. I've chosen to live on a farm on purpose because I want to be, first of all, my animals demand that I come outside every day, right?
Right.
They have to be fed. They have to be tended to, rain or snow or, shine. And so that has been really helpful to me, I think, to stay connected to animals and to the earth, and just always having this constant reminder that life is so much bigger than me. And there's this whole other world of animals and insects and trees and green things that I think really does help me mentally as well. And I am a person of faith, and my faith means a lot to me. And so I try to care well for myself spiritually in terms of being a person of prayer and taking time to meditate and to be in religious community as well. So those are some of the ways that I think I'm able to put my oxygen mask on first before going in. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're also, being the leader, being the priest, you're always giving that energy. Yeah. And sometimes people don't give it back. It's like you're always caring for other people. You're always trying to hold the burden. And so taking that time, I think meditation is a great way to do that for sure. And prayer for you. And like you said, doing the physical activity to get the hormones going. Yeah. So I feel the same way. And I've definitely been through my share of depression as well, being a coach and being at the gym half the day for other people, but not wanting to be there for myself. So, I can see a parallel there in caring for others.
Yeah. Well, while you're thinking about that, I also want to say how, for me as a clergy person, having community that doesn't need me to care for them has been really helpful. And for the first year at the gym, I refused to tell people what I did because I didn't want them to know, because I didn't want to have to suddenly stop cussing.
I think that's great. That's one of my favorite parts.
And so that has been having other communities that aren't at all related to church, who, people who are looking towards me to not be their pastor has been really important, not just gym community, but activist communities. Like, there are a lot of different spaces where I try to like make sure that I can come and show up and be like Kim the beekeeper instead of, Kim the pastor or Kim the candidate.
Uh-huh.
So I've really tried to work to have a broad community.
Hmm. I'm reminded of a photo of you, um, very famous photo of you. I believe it's in St. Louis. Is
Yeah,
that right?
that's right.
And you're an activist. We talked about that briefly. You're an activist, and you were in St. Louis, and I don't remember the exact circumstances, but you were holding a woman who had fainted, and it was, well, one, I was obviously proud to know you and proud of that moment for you, but I was also taken back a little bit because I was suddenly realizing that that's a life that I don't know anything about, and that's a life that I don't understand. So can you talk a little bit about your activism and about maybe even being strong for others in that way?
Part of my activism does come out of the same place, the same heart that I have as a pastor, which is to care for people, to show up for people when they are hurting, when they're sad, and when they're angry. And so when I go to protest, like I did in St. Louis or here in Atlanta, that is the spirit in which I go. It is to be with people in the midst of their emotions. And part of that means me having to kind of maintain and like take care of my own emotions.
Yeah.
I took a colleague with me to the front line of the protest this weekend, and I had to tell him, like, you don't get to react in the ways that other people do when you are standing here as clergy. Like, we don't get to yell back. We are here to just hold space and to allow people to say the things that they need to say. This isn't our time. Like, we get to be strong in a different way, which is to be unmoving, right? So when protesters run, we stand still and we look at the police officers in the eyes as human beings, and we see them as human and trust that they will see us as human because we're not running, right? And that kind of strength, I think, is really important for all types of reasons and all types of movements. And I think, the story or the picture that you talked about, Jonathan. So that was an evening in Ferguson.
Right.
The young woman that I'm holding, her brother was shot that night at the protest, and she had just learned that that was happening. And there's the photo that was in the New York Times that you talk about, and then there's the second photo that was in the St. Louis Dispatch where I'm actually carrying her, like I'm physically carrying her across the street to get to an ambulance. And the caption that I used when I posted that photo was to say, "This is why I CrossFit.
Uh,
I CrossFit so that I can physically carry someone when they need that to happen," right? Like, as a pastor, as a chaplain, it's not just this emotional weight that I'm helping people carry, but in that instance, it was her physical body, right, that I picked up and carried to safety. And so I wasn't expecting CrossFit to show up in my life in that way.
mhm.
But it was really important that I knew that I could do it, right? Like, I could see her and I was like, oh yeah, she doesn't weigh a whole
Mhm.
much, I knew that I could carry her and I could carry her to safety. Um, and I'm grateful that that was one of the roles that I could play that night. And but fundamentally, I think for me, I think it's just important to keep showing up and being this presence as a pastor, as a chaplain, as this person who's just, I'm going to be here with you all. And I'm not just like with the protesters, I'm also with the police too, in this
Yeah.
strange juxtaposition of I'm here to see all of us as humans.
Where did you start developing these philosophies? I mean, yes, you're a priest, but you were called to that for some reason. So where did all of this start cropping up for you?
Yeah, I think that some of it started realizing as a child that I could somehow always see the goodness in people, even people that others couldn't see the goodness in. Like, there was just, I don't know, I could somehow realize that the guy who was the big bully in high school was really like deep inside a decent human being. We just had to find it. So I think that was a part of that. And over time, so when I was in college, I started thinking about becoming a pastor, and my mentor that I was connected to happened to be a pastor who did civil rights work, and so he like was going out in the streets and leading protests as a pastor. And I was in South Carolina at the time when they were still debating whether or not to make Martin Luther King Jr. Day a holiday. And so this is like this huge thing in Greenville County. And he happened to be kind of leading that movement. And so I went to all these meetings at his church where he was community organizing, and spoke at protests with him. And like, so he really showed me like, this is what it means to be a pastor. And I know like there are lots and lots of different ways that one could be a pastor or a priest, but he was my role model, and it matched my own heart. It matched kind of my own thoughts about how I hope the world can be. And I think it was just a real great thing that happened, that he got to be my mentor during that really critical phase where I was just beginning to explore ministry.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that you are now maybe passing on the torch a little bit. You said to your colleague who came out to the protest with you in Atlanta, and you're giving this sage advice on how to interact in that chaotic environment.
Yeah.
As far as being yourself at the gym, you talked about not wanting to tell anybody you were a priest for a year or however long. How can you be yourself at Move? And what strengths do you think you bring to that community specifically?
The secret came out that I was a priest. Do you remember this?
I don't.
So we were at a meeting. This is when Shayna was still there, and it was a meeting about being paleo and how we couldn't have bread and we couldn't drink wine. And I clearly I had some emotions about that, and I just kind of blurted out, "I'm a fucking priest."
Yeah. And it's Easter weekend.
I'm gonna drink some wine, and that's when, and people laughed about it and reacted. I think didn't, at no point did anybody be like, "Oh my gosh, you guys," and I think that was really helpful and was the sign and the cue for me that I could be who I am, like my full self. And that's been a real gift. So, I've been able to do weddings for some Move folk, and there's a baby out there that I was supposed to be baptizing. We have to figure that out. And that's actually the beauty of the Move community, right? Like, we end up doing these things for each other out of the other vocations and occupations that we have beyond Move. And I found that to be such a great gift. As a pastor, I work with people who are experiencing homelessness. Like, that's the work that I do every day. And sometimes I've found myself with parishioners who needed an attorney, and there are attorneys that I could call here at Move.
Right.
And I watch Move be generous too to the community in Avondale Estates. And that's been really beautiful for me to witness and feel a part of that, not out of some type of religious obligation, but because Move Nation, we're just good people.
Yeah.
Do good things. And so that's, I think, also helped me know that I am free to be fully myself here.
I was reading something earlier today, and it was discussing disparity and inequality. And obviously we're in times right now where it's popping up everywhere. And this was particularly about how COVID affects people differently socioeconomically. People who are Black, people who are poor are affected in a different way than people who are wealthy or white. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, what does equality look like to you when it comes to wellness and health?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wish that we all could just be well, right? And there are a lot of reasons why there are disparities in health outcomes for African Americans and people who are poor, all of which are related, I think, to systemic racism and injustice. And I also want to highlight that I can speak as an African American about African American communities, right? Like we've also been incredibly resilient and resistant. So while we might die at greater rates from heart disease and any other major disease, and we might die at higher rates, we also though have this like really strong grounded sense of spirituality that I think helps guide us through those kinds of things. And so there's a certain wellness that comes, and obviously we're talking in big generalizations here, but
Sure.
I do think there's a certain wellness that comes from being in communities with one another. That is a different kind. It's a spiritual wellness, an emotional wellness that doesn't necessarily replicate itself physically. But I dream of a world where we all have access to good food to eat, and where we have access to being able to have the time and the resources to work out when we want to in the ways that we need to. That's the kind of world that I'm dreaming of, the kind of world that I'm working towards. Because I think for me, fundamentally, as Americans, we talk a lot about freedom.
Hmm.
And I think that we can't be free if we're not well, right? Like if we can't breathe, like
Hmm.
like literally, if we can't breathe because of COVID or because there's a police officer's knee on our neck, then we can't be free. And so I think that wellness is deeply related and connected to freedom, which is fundamentally an American goal. An American dream is for us to all be free.
Right. How do you think we can set up society in that way and having equal access or maybe even equal access to resources?
That's a big, hard
Yeah.
thing to figure out. Obviously, I'm running for office, and so I have some ideas about what we can do
Mm.
legislatively that I think are really important. And I also think there has to be a major cultural change in this country if we're ever actually going to get there. Um, I think that I think that until everybody can see that other people are actually human beings who are worthy of having just as good of health as you have, just as good of schools as, other people's kids have, until we can see each other as being worthy and valuable, just as worthy and valuable as the next person, we're going to continue to really struggle with this. And so as a pastor and as a minister, like my job is to like work on people's hearts, right? Like I do heart work, not their
Mm.
physical heart. That's you, Jonathan. Um, but on their emotional heart, on their heart in terms of how we connect with one another. That is my role as a pastor. And I do think that if we want a world that is not full of inequality, then it's going to require some major heart work on behalf of all American citizens and quite frankly all around the world. And simultaneous to that, and this is why I like wear multiple hats, right? We have to change our hearts, but there are also a lot of laws that we do need to change and modify so that there can be an opportunity for us all.
Yeah. I think as I'm kind of progressing through my path as a coach and learning new things and talking with more people and gaining more experience, I'm learning a lot more about communication.
Yeah.
And probably the most important part that I'm finding the most important aspect of it is listening.
Mm.
I can't offer a one size fits all solution. You have to talk with somebody and they have to tell you what their problems are. And you have to actually listen to them before you can give them any advice or before you can see what the problem is and develop a solution together. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on communication and gaining perspective and listening.
Yeah, I think that is so crucial and so key, being able to listen and hear each other's stories. And, so I talk about how I have like a lot of different kinds of communities that I participate in. So, the gym community is very different than my work community, which is very
Mm.
different than my farm community. And part of that is because I want to hear lots of different stories, right? I want to be able to listen in different ways. And so, I listen to the story. I mean, this is, I think, part of how I'm also able to do my work better. So I get to listen to the stories of police officers who have compassion and desire for the world to be better, and who can tell stories of their own experiences of police brutality, right? I get to listen and hear their stories. And then I also get to listen and hear the stories of Black and brown men who talk about the ways that they have been harassed and assaulted over and over by police. It's in hearing both of those stories and all of those stories that I think it softens my heart. It also opens me up to think about solutions in new ways, right? So because we hear each other's stories, we know that it's not a one size fits all. If I go down to Clarkston and talk to my friends who are coming from war torn countries, they have a really different story about their own experiences that has to shape how I think about legislation, because their stories influence that. And then, your story influences that, Jonathan, and my story. And so this listening process, I do think is so, so important. And my hope would be that we would all learn to listen to each other a little more, and that we would also, though, create spaces where people feel safe to share those stories, where they will be believed, right? I think that as we think about COVID-19 and the ways that it's negatively impacted Black communities in such a higher rate, I'm clear that some of that is just because Black people have walked into hospitals all around this nation, and people have not listened to their story of why they don't feel well, and they've sent them back home to die. And so we have to listen to each other.
Yeah, there's a mistrust in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And I think even some people mistrust their own story.
Yeah. Say more about that, Jonathan.
So I was listening to a podcast about people who come from war-torn countries, and they kind of pick themselves up by their bootstraps and are starting to go to college, and they have a little bit of help. And this one woman was writing her acceptance letter, or she was applying for college. And so the question is often, what struggles have you faced and how did you overcome them? And her struggle, she said, was that she stopped bullies from bullying people at school. And she had a mentor, and they were like, why did you say that? You came from this country where there was rape and genocide and this and that, and look where you are now. And she just felt like, oh, well, that's just me. That's not, that's something in my past. So I think there's a little bit of maybe lack of confidence in telling who you are, who you really are, or maybe even just coming to terms with yourself and being able to move through that trauma and, I don't know, be able to express it.
Yeah. And I think some of it, sometimes you're too close. So if that picture that was taken of me in the New York, if it hadn't shown up in the New York Times, I'm not sure I would have ever told anybody that story, because it was so hard and so traumatic. So I'm glad that there was a photographer who kind of forced that story to be told. But I think sometimes we're just too close to our own stories to realize that they could help somebody else. And I mean, I've thought a lot about my campaign, and so people make stories about my campaign for me all the time. It's just kind of it's the part that I have no control over.
Yeah.
And, for me, like inside, maybe I should have said this early on, like inside, Jonathan, I think of myself as this little Black girl from Cowpen, South Carolina, who grew up like, in the rural country with, God-loving parents who made me go to church every time it was open. Like, that's how I see myself. It's just like this little country girl from Cowpen, South Carolina. And then I read like an article in the newspaper about myself, and I'm just like, that's me too. But it's hard for me to see it, right? Like, I read an article that says, Kim Jackson is running a historical campaign to become the first out LGBT senator in Georgia. And I'm just like, no, this is Kim Jackson who lives on a farm and shovels chicken shit every day. Right. So I think I'm too close to the story to really even, it's not that I don't trust it. It's just hard to see it because I'm so close to it. Yeah. And because inside because inside I'm still just that little girl from Cowpen, South Carolina.
I wonder if that's maybe not quite as important to you as where you're going.
Mm.
Well, I don't know. Maybe you see yourself as, I'm going to be this Georgia state senator, and that's who I am. And maybe your sights are set on the goal versus on who you think you are or who you think you were.
Yeah, I think I mean, I certainly obviously dream every day about being elected and becoming a senator. And some days when I allow myself to like go to that space of thinking about how I think of myself, I think I just feel like amazed and wonderful and also like very surprised at how is it that this little girl from Cowpen, South Carolina is doing this thing? Like it's still surprising to me because I haven't quite been able to fully understand that when you look at me, you don't see some little black girl from Cowpen, South Carolina, right? You see Kim Jackson, who is kind, and all those other wonderful things you said at the beginning. So yeah, it's yes and yes,
Mm-hmm.
I am focused on this goal of being elected, and I'm still just totally confused about how did this happen that this little country black girl is in the
Uh-huh.
big city doing stuff. Like it's all very conflicted and beautiful, and it gives me joy, and sometimes I'm really scared too. But it's all wonderful.
So we talked a lot about you being kind of that strong center or the leader, but right now you've probably got a lot of support as well.
Yeah.
So how are you allowing that, or how are you coping with maybe having people help you?
Yeah. So, you know how you said earlier that you figured out that a lot of us are just kind of making this up as we go?
Uh-huh.
That is definitely my life right now. I'm running a campaign for the first time. And so, because I'm clear I don't know what I'm doing, it's been easier, I think, to accept support and help, particularly as it relates to the campaign. Um, but it's also been overwhelming. Like, I I knew that I had community and I knew I had friends and there are people who like me, like we know those things. But I didn't realize how much support I had. And it's honestly been overwhelming to see all of these people, like people that I went to high school, people who do know me as like Kim Jackson from Calvin, South Carolina, have reached out to me. Like they live all around the nation and they've reached out saying, how can I support you? How can I support your campaign? And that's just been incredible. And then there are people whom I've never met in my life that I remember who were also like, how can I help you? And so I think my heart, like every night, I feel like I just go to sleep with so much gratitude in my heart for all of these people. And and also like not knowing, so I think a lot of times when people give us something we want to give something back to them,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, how do I tell all of these people thank you? How do I respond in kind and reciprocate to all of this support? And what my friend and mentor keeps saying to me is the way you respond is by being you, because it's you that has inspired these people to want to be involved. And so I'm trying really hard to do that, to be me,
Right.
and to believe that's enough, that's people are responding and wanting to support me because of who I am, and that's enough for me to just continue to be consistent about who I am.
Yeah, I think there's a real burden with conviction. And,
Yeah.
you've told all these people, you are this person and you're going to do this thing and they love it. And now you have to do it. You have to, that's how you give back to them is by being the person you say you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to the conversation?
I'm so appreciative that you just took the time to have this conversation with me, Jonathan. And I do want to say one of the things that I love about CrossFit is that it has been this space that I can come and be myself, and I can be out of shape, and whatever in shape means, I'm not quite sure. But like there, I mean, a couple of things. First of all, I think we have aged together. And that's, like many of us started in our 20s, and we have been aging together, and that's been really wonderful and helpful to me. But we've also, there are Black folks at CrossFit, there are white folks, there are Latinx folks. Like, Move Nation is a nation, and it reflects that, and that's been wonderful. And there are tall people and short people and skinny people and fat people and like everything in between. And we are, we are very young, and we are not so young, and that the diversity of our community has meant the world to me. And it has inspired me to believe that those types of communities can be replicated in other ways. Like it's not just the Move gym where this can happen. Like, we can create these kinds of communities that are diverse and that are complicated with many different jobs and all of these things that are represented at Move. Like, this is possible. And so thank you for creating a space that feels safe for us to come in with all different body types and all different vocations, and all different beliefs, right? Like, thank you for
Right.
creating that space. It's meant a lot to me, and I'm very grateful.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Thank you so much. And I think you're right. I think we have a lot to offer as a community, and I think you are just a shining example of what's possible. So, yeah, thank you so much for being a part of our community.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks again for coming on the podcast, and hopefully I'll see you sometime soon at the gym. Until then.
Until then, I'll keep following Carrie's instructions as best I can.
Good. Excellent. All right. Well, I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks so much, Jonathan.
All right. Thank you.